The occupation of Ukrainian territory is becoming more tactical every day. The Russian army's failure to raise the white flag despite all the casualties has led Ukrainian troops to organize more agile operations. Many of the attacks in recent months have been carried out with a wide range of considerations. The Ukrainian army has targeted Russian supply routes and equipment depots. Russian troops have lost a lot of blood after these clashes. Seeing this, Ukrainian troops increased their speed and organized an epic attack the other day. Russian logistics were disrupted by the worst explosion in the last 2 months. Let's take a look at the situation in which the Ukrainian troops, with their ingenuity, put the Russian army in. A railroad bridge in a Russian-occupied city in Ukraine was sabotaged the previous day by Ukrainian military intelligence and pro-Kiev insurgents. A source in the main directorate of intelligence of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry said the bridge in Berdyansk was blown up. The bridge was between the building of the Vodokanal Utilities Company and a car wash on Skidny Street, the Ukrainian broadcaster reported. On Google Maps, a building called Berdyansk Vodokanal on Skidny Street is next to a car wash called Atlantida. There is a railroad track behind both buildings. Social media users posted images of the reported location, which they said was part of the bridge targeted in the attack. It appears to be part of the bridge just behind the car wash and the public building. The Berdyansk City Military Administration said in a post that a large explosion was heard in the city and that the possibility that the bridge may have been blown up was being considered. The administration said it was awaiting further information. A source told the Ukrainian news agency that the explosion on the bridge destroyed the connection of the railway line to Berdyansk. The source continued, "It is impossible to deliver fuel and lubricants, weapons and ammunition to the occupying forces in the temporarily occupied Ukrainian city." The source added that Russian media reported that all bridges were still intact, but photos of the entire bridge have not yet been published. Russian state media characterized the reports of the bridge explosion as a clear disinformation campaign. Analysts in the field have reported that the GUR's operations in occupied territories such as Berdyansk are aimed at damaging strategic targets of its opponents, such as bridges, ammunition depots, and supply bases, in order to undermine the Russian war effort. Ukrainian authorities reported that Russia dropped a gliding bomb on the historic Derzhprom building in downtown Kharkiv, injuring 7 people. According to many analysts, the destruction of the bridge completely paralyzed railway communications with Berdyansk and made it difficult to deliver fuel, weapons, and ammunition to the occupying forces in the city. The analysts continued. Local occupation sources and propagandists claim that all bridges are intact, but they do not show any photos of the supposedly intact bridge. GUR's operations in the occupied territories are aimed at undermining the enemy's offensive capabilities, destabilizing the situation in the frontline areas, and providing support to Ukrainian military operations. The main objectives of these attacks include destroying or damaging strategic facilities such as bridges, ammunition depots, supply bases, and command centers in order to disrupt Russian logistics and complicate Moscow's offensive operations. These operational-level actions are part of HUR's comprehensive strategy to weaken Russia's military presence in Ukraine. Ukrainian troops did not give the Russian military time to rest after this shocking blow and immediately mobilized. Ukraine destroyed an ethanol plant in Voronezh after launching a devastating drone strike against Russia. Kiev's military has repeatedly targeted fuel depots and ammunition depots deep inside Russian territory in an attempt to disrupt supplies to Vladimir Putin's war machine. The attacks have caused havoc and chaos in the Russian rear, causing significant damage to key military infrastructure. For the second time, Ukrainian drones targeted an ethanol spirits plant in the village of Krasnoye in Novokopersky district. The drones hit the plant directly, causing a large fire. Video footage of the spectacular explosions and subsequent fire, recorded by locals and shared on social media, has emerged. In one clip, a drone can be heard approaching its target before the sound of an explosion is heard, and a huge fireball rises into the night sky. A deadly fire also broke out at the Aninsky distillery, about 50 kilometers from Krasnoye. The plant is located right next to the Ananefte product oil depot. According to Regional Governor Alexander Gusev, 2 workers were injured in the fire. According to preliminary assessments, 1 building and a storage tank were affected by the fire. There are also preliminary reports of damage to 2 residential buildings and an auxiliary structure. Last week, Ukrainian drones also struck distilleries in the Tula region, just south of Moscow. Andriy Kovalenko, head of Ukraine's Counter-Disinformation Center, said the Russians were using the alcohol distilleries to produce aviation and rocket fuel. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed that 7 Ukrainian drones were shot down over the Voronezh region overnight. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called on Western allies to provide his country with more air defense systems. He said Russia had carried out more than 2,100 glider bombs and more than 560 drone strikes in the last week. These Ukrainian operations are causing heavy losses for Russia. All these losses are a clear sign that Russia is losing power on the international stage. Just when the Russian army was tired of all these losses, another disaster struck. Chechen President Ramzan Kadyrov said that the Special Forces University that Russian President Vladimir Putin visited 2 months ago was attacked by a drone. Kadyrov, a close ally of Putin, said the training center in the North Caucasus Republic of Chechnya was damaged in a drone strike early Tuesday morning. If carried out by Kiev forces, it would be the first attack on the region since Putin began his invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Kadyrov made the following statement on his Telegram account. At 06:30 the previous morning, the roof of an empty building on the territory of the Russian Special Forces University in Gudermes caught fire as a result of a drone strike. Gudermes is a town on the Sunja River, about 35 kilometers east of the capital Grozny. Kadyrov said no one was killed or injured in the fire, the blaze was extinguished, and there was no disruption at the university. The Chechen dictator said police were investigating the attack, but did not say whether Ukraine was responsible. In a video released by the Russian state news agency RIA, Kadyrov said, "They bid us, we will destroy them." This statement apparently did not refer directly to Ukraine. Anton Gerashchenko, a former deputy minister in Ukraine's interior ministry, and now an advisor to the ministry, posted photos on X purportedly showing the aftermath of the attack. The leader of Chechnya, some 600 kilometers southeast of the Ukrainian border, has been a passionate supporter of the occupation and the Putin regime, and has previously described himself as a foot soldier of the Kremlin leader. The Russian Special Forces University, the only private training institution in Chechnya that trains special forces personnel, was established as a center for preparing soldiers for war and began producing fighter jets this spring, the Moscow Times reported. President Vladimir Putin visited the university in August. The Kremlin said the Russian leader inspected the training complex, observed lectures, spoke with special forces commanders, instructors, and volunteers training there. Since the start of Russia's so-called special operation, the university has been used to train soldiers for the war and is said to have sent some 50,000 soldiers to join the war effort. There has been another important development in this context. While NATO and Ukraine's Western allies this week officially confirmed the participation of North Korean troops in Russia's war against Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that the total number of Pyongyang's troops is approaching 12,000. Zelensky said that there are already about 3,000 North Korean troops on Russian territory, with another 9,000 expected to arrive shortly. "We think they will soon reach 12,000, Zelensky said at a press conference in Iceland, according to officials. Chief of the General Staff Andriy Yermak added on social media, "This is an escalation. Sanctions alone are not enough. We need weapons and a clear plan to prevent further North Korean involvement in the war in Europe." Yermak continued, "The enemy understands power. Our allies have that power." Yermak was responding to comments made by NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte after a meeting with South Korean military intelligence officials confirmed the presence of Pyongyang's infantry units in Eastern Europe. Rutte also reported that more than 600,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began in February 2022. He emphasized that Moscow cannot continue its special operation, which it has been conducting for years without foreign assistance. Just the other day, U.S. President Joe Biden's administration also confirmed the estimated figure of 10,000 North Korean troops to join the war, and warned Pyongyang's allies in China that it would be destabilizing and very dangerous for them to support this deployment and Moscow's illegal occupation in general. In addition, as Ukraine prepares to confront North Korean troops believed to be in the Kursk region bordering Russia, analysts say China should be concerned about stronger pressure and reactions from NATO. NATO views Beijing as a power that backs Pyongyang and supports Russia's war against Ukraine. South Korea's National Intelligence Agency reports that it has received information that North Korean troops are advancing towards the front line of the war in Russia near Ukraine. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said on Monday that North Korean military units had been deployed to Kursk, Russia's western border region. He made the statement after a South Korean delegation briefed NATO, Australia, Japan, and New Zealand on North Korea's role in Russia's war against Ukraine. Rutte said North Korea's troop deployment, as well as ammunition and ballistic missile shipments, represented a dangerous expansion of Russia's war, threatening both Indo-Pacific and Euro-Atlantic security. Rutte added that in exchange for North Korea's troops and weapons, Moscow is providing Pyongyang with military technology and other support to circumvent international sanctions. The U.S. estimates that North Korea has sent around 10,000 troops to eastern Russia for training purposes. North Korea has said that if North Korean troops were found in Russia, it would be an act in accordance with international law. Analysts say North Korea's decision to send troops to help Russia will further strain its relations with China, which is unlikely to take kindly to a development that could strengthen NATO's ties with South Korea. Ramon Pacheco Pardo, who was part of the European Union's delegation to previous meetings with North Korea, South Korea, China, and Japan, said, China should be concerned that NATO is paying more attention to North Korea. It should be particularly concerned that many NATO member states see Beijing as a facilitator of Pyongyang. Pacheco Pardo, professor of international relations at King's College London, said North Korea's troop deployment would lead NATO to focus more on Pyongyang's cyber activities, nuclear and missile programs, and proliferation issues, which could have a domino effect on China. Pacheco Pardo continued, China cannot afford to cut ties with North Korea because of its own security interests. Therefore, Beijing has to put up with North Korea siding with Russia and being labeled as part of an axis of authoritarian revisionist states. Earlier in October, NATO held talks with Asian partners to strengthen the security link between Europe and the Indo-Pacific, expressing concern that countries like China and North Korea could become security spoilers in their backyard. Bruce Bennett, senior defense analyst at the Rand Corporation, said Beijing is concerned about Moscow's growing influence in the region through military cooperation with Pyongyang. He said China looked at North Korea's sending of munitions to Russia as a limited time frame. But following North Korea's troop deployment, Beijing is concerned that long-term ties could contribute to Moscow's growth as a dominant power in East Asia, threatening Beijing's view on taking on that role. In response to a VOA question about the development of North Korea-Russia military cooperation, the Chinese embassy in Washington said Beijing hopes all sides can de-escalate the situation and strive for a political solution. Speaking at the BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia, on October 23rd, Chinese President Xi Jinping said the Ukrainian crisis should stop adding fuel to the fire without naming any country. Beijing, which sees North Korea as a buffer zone between its mainland and U.S. forces stationed in South Korea, has long been Pyongyang's main ally as its largest trading partner. To prevent its destabilization, China has protected the regime's economic lifeline, subjected to heavy sanctions, and kept out of the global economy. But strains in bilateral relations began when North Korean leader Kim Jong-un visited Russia last year and worsened when Kim and Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a mutual defense pact in Pyongyang this summer. According to Roy Kompausen, a senior expert on Chinese security at the National Bureau of Asian Research, the latest development in the deepening military ties between Pyongyang and Moscow could complicate Beijing's plans to take advantage of both sides in the Russia-Ukraine war. Kompausen said China wants to support Russia enough so that Moscow can win slowly but avoid too many repercussions, especially economic sanctions against China itself. Kompausen continued, an escalation of the current conflict emanating from Asia could have the negative effect of putting more pressure on Beijing itself, which is exactly what it wants to avoid. Earlier this month, the U.S. imposed sanctions on Chinese companies that collaborated with Russia to produce drones for use against Ukraine. Bruce Klingner, Senior Research Fellow for Northeast Asia at the Heritage Foundation, told VOA on Friday that it would do little good for Beijing to form a more formal trilateral alliance because it is so closely linked to provocative behavior by Russia and North Korea that it could trigger secondary sanctions against China. In 2023, China was the largest EU import trading partner and the third largest export trading partner. After all this, the Russian army took the stage in all its brutality. Moscow's bombs blew up an iconic skyscraper in Kharkiv, injuring 6 civilians. The Kharkiv regional governor reported that Russian airstrikes had destroyed the iconic Derzhprom building in the regional capital, which has become a UNESCO-designated symbol of Ukraine's second-largest city. The attack site is one of the places on UNESCO's tentative list of monuments, under consideration for inclusion on the World Heritage List. As we can see, the Russian military has no respect for values. A direct hit was recorded on the Derzhprom building. The governor of the region, Oleg Sinigubov, wrote on Telegram, sharing photos showing a hole drilled in the facade, exploding windows, and shattered interiors. The building also suffered minor damage in a missile strike in January this year. The governor continued, with the attack, which is believed to have been carried out with pre-guided bombs, the invaders attacked a landmark of the city known to every resident of Kharkiv. This is a monument of national importance, a building in the constructivist style. According to the authorities, the modernist structure was opened in 1928 and is a complex of state administrative buildings connected by overpasses. It is considered one of the first Soviet skyscrapers, a forerunner of the famous Seven Sisters in Moscow, Stalinist skyscrapers built between 1947 and 1957, which were the tallest buildings in Europe at the time. At least 6 people were injured in the attack, and the building of a medical institution was also damaged. While the Russian army continues to commit atrocities at every opportunity, Ukrainian troops rejoiced at a welcome development. Sweden has announced a $63 million aid package to Ukraine as part of a Danish-led project aimed at boosting the production of indigenous weapons, such as missiles for F-16s. This development has made all Ukrainians very happy. Stockholm announced the allocation of 63 million euros in aid to Kiev, including a donation of 20 million euros for the purchase of locally produced weapons for the Armed Forces of Ukraine, AFU. This was part of a Danish-led initiative to purchase weapons from Ukrainian manufacturers. The remaining 43 million euros will be channeled into other multilateral initiatives aimed at supporting Ukraine, officials said. Last week, the Swedish Defense Materiel Administration, FMV, decided to negotiate this deal with Copenhagen to donate an equivalent amount of military aid to Ukraine. The funds will go towards air-to-air missiles for Ukraine's F-16 program, a coalition to train Ukrainian sailors, demining, training, and information technology projects. Ukrainska Pravda explained that this latest tranche is part of a new package of military aid to Kiev, worth more than 400 million euros that Stockholm announced in September. This includes possible training for Ukrainian pilots in the Swedish-made Gripen fighter jet. There are no immediate plans to send the highly sought-after Saab-made jets to Ukraine, as NATO's newest member wants to have enough jets for its own air force. But Sweden is by no means ruling out the possibility. In fact, about half of September's $440 million package is earmarked for the purchase of new material kits for the Gripen fighter jets. But this is for an older version than the state-of-the-art Gripen JS-39E, which potentially has a longer range and greater payload capacity than the Gripen JS-39D on offer. As we can see, the struggle on Ukrainian territory is in full swing. And while Ukrainian fighters are fighting with all their might to purify their land, friendly countries are sending aid packages. Thank you for tuning in. On top of all this, the Russian army is rapidly continuing its nefarious plans. North Korea's military presence continues on the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine, especially in Donetsk. According to the head of the Center for Combating Disinformation, CCD, Andriy Kovalenko, these soldiers have not yet joined the war because they are engineer troops. But they will be used soon. Kovalenko made a statement as follows: "These North Korean soldiers will wear Russian uniforms, mix with Russian documents, kalmyks and buryats, and try to prove that they are DPRK soldiers." The Russians are counting on it. At least we are aware that the enemy first made such a plan in the Donetsk region. Kovalenko noted that they will be deployed to other regions after the training. According to the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, 11,000 North Korean military personnel will be ready for use in battles in the ranks of the Russian Federation in November, and they are currently training at training sites in Russia. On the other hand, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky discussed with community and district leaders in the Zakarpattia region the participation of local communities in the development of the internal strengthening plan of Ukraine and stressed the importance of Ukrainian unity. Zelensky made a statement as follows: "This plan is being developed with great attention to detail. Naturally, there is a role for communities in it. You will receive the first draft of this plan along with sections highlighting how communities can best support every citizen locally." He stressed the importance of working with the communities of partner countries that have the potential to strengthen the Ukrainian army. The security guarantees that Ukraine received from its allies, its integration into the EU and NATO, and the dialogue between the Hungarian community in Zakarpattia and Hungary were also given importance deck. In addition, the construction of industrial parks, the development of border checkpoints, road repairs, increasing state subsidies for providing free meals to primary school students, and cooperation with foreign enterprises were discussed during the talks.